Hey, I'm Bryan Fenley, and joining me today on the On to Something podcast, a place where I bring on folks from sports media, where we talk not just about their work lives, but their personal lives and their family lives. It's Pete Gianesini, who is Senior Director, Digital Audio Programming at ESPN. Our conversation goes in many different directions. We go underneath the surface, really learn what he's like on a deep level, and let's get this thing started. Before we begin, though, if you feel so inclined, don't forget to subscribe. Here's my conversation with Pete. He is Syracuse made and is celebrating more than 25 years at ESPN. Can you believe it? It's been that long, and it's going to continue on with how well he has been doing. Senior Director, Digital Audio Programming at ESPN. It's Peter Gianesini. He joins me on the On to Something podcast. I'm Bryan Fenley, a national radio anchor, work with other media outlets. And this is a place, Pete, we're going to go beyond what you do work-wise. We're going to learn about you as a father. We're going to learn the whole journey of you, and I'm excited to have you on.
Oh, thanks so much. I'm really glad to be here, and thanks for having me.
So where you are right now, I'm guessing, is in Bristol. Your office is at ESPN. What kind of view do you have outside of your window?
Oh, sure. I wish I could bring my computer over. I actually have a fantastic spot. The center of campus is right behind me. So as I look over and to the right, it's where the cafeteria is. Over to the left is one of our main buildings. So on a much nicer time of year than this, you'll see people milling about and the beautiful landscaping and everything that goes on up at campus. So it's a great spot. I've bounced around to a few different offices over campus over the years, and I'm more than happy to have this one for a while, hopefully.
When you're going into the cafeteria, what are you usually getting for food?
It's usually quick. In fact, what I got today is a go-to simple wrap, chicken Caesar wrap, something of that sort, maybe a couple of chips on the side, that more often than not is grab and bring back up here. If I'm having lunch with somebody at the cafeteria, I might do something a little bit more ambitious, but it's usually a hit and run. Let's put it that way.
And usually you're wearing orange, obviously supporting your alma mater in Syracuse. And obviously you went there, you graduated, if I'm not mistaken, in 1994. And even all those years removed, Pete, what about you still feels like you're a student there?
Oh, wow. It's when I meet with young alums or even current students, you still see the same recipe of ingredients being put together as they're looking to build their careers, and figure out what they want to be. I went to school with the goal of being an on-air talent. I wanted to do play-by-play. I wanted to be the next voice of the Hartford Whalers. There's a variety of reasons why that's not the case, some of which are painfully obvious, and the team doesn't exist, and some of which are a little bit more nuanced than that. And my favorite conversations, honestly, whether it's a senior in school or a kid who just got out, who's straddling that line between chasing the on-air aspirations, but also recognizing the opportunities to grow and be creative from radio standpoint on the other side of the glass, and maybe be the person whose name's not on the marquee, but still get to do some really cool, rewarding things with their career.
You've done a lot of cool things in your career. You have done a lot of cool things when you were a student, and the athletic department, the basketball team at Syracuse has done a lot of cool things. To understand your fandom, because, in doing my homework and research on you, Syracuse basketball has been such a passion of yours ever since you were a child. If you could be the mascot of Syracuse for one day, what would you get out of that?
Probably a lot of cardio. I know people who have done that job, and if you've ever spent as much time with Otto as I have, he's large, he's round. There's a lot going on there, and I think when my day was done, if I were asked to serve in that capacity, I probably would have dropped a few pounds along the way.
I love it. Pete Gianesini is with me. I'm Bryan Fenley. When it comes to your work in audio, how does your mood determine what you like to consume from an audio standpoint?
Is it mood, or is it just sort of place in what you're feeling at the moment? You know, is there something, and particularly now because I'm in podcasting, and maybe we'll get to, you know, differences between working in radio and working in podcasting, right? And we're taping this just off of a crazy weekend in the NFL with crazy finishes, Patriots, Raiders, all that other stuff, right? And I think radio and social media serve the immediate reaction. Oh my God, I can't believe that just happened. Why did that happen? What happens next? So on and so forth. The other platform that I spent a good ton of time in, and what I'm currently working in, is podcasting, is sort of a deeper dive, right? And a day later, how the heck did that happen? How does team A respond from what happened with team B, right? And just a little bit more thought, a little more nuance, maybe a little less emotion. I think in a podcast, a lot of people don't like to be screamed at, where if something just happened on radio, it's like, oh my God, Argentina, they won, dude. And you see all that I think the two platforms complement themselves really nicely. And I'm actually really glad that they don't try to do the same thing.
And why do you say that?
Because I think in sports, people want to live in the moment. People want to be part of the emotion, the irrational anger after a loss, the jubilation after a win, where I'm a Giant fan, right? They won the game. It might have been pass interference, might not have been pass interference. I just care that they won and I'm happy about it, right? And then a day later, I might want to explore the deep dive into how did that call get missed, or what's the league going to do about that you sort of have the tactical sports fandom where it's like, okay, who should they sign, or who should they get, or what should they do? But you also want to have the irrational, emotional part of sports fandom as well, right? And to be able to do both, I don't think there's one platform that allows for that. I think you do have to have a mix and match of television, video, audio, social, all those different things to complete the sports fan experience. I don't think any one of those platforms captures all of it.
And by you describing how podcast is more from an analytical perspective, you get a day off more so to kind of deep dive beyond, like you said, the irrational emotions coming right off a win or a loss. What about your brain, and how does it work from an analytical standpoint?
You know, I think as I look at the podcast portfolio of shows that I oversee, or let's just say I'm being pitched a new one, right? Sure. There's so many creative people in a company like this that on a weekly basis, there's a podcast idea, whether it's another perspective on a sport we're already covering, or a sport we're not currently doing a podcast for, but maybe we should, so on and so forth. And one of the first things I'll look at is, okay, is that already being done somewhere else? You know, and especially is it already being done well somewhere else? Is it duplicative of something that's already happening, whether it's in our shop or somewhere out there in the marketplace? And if the answer is no, and it's like, okay, is this niche that isn't being covered actually one that people care about, right? And when I say people, a large enough amount of people to be worth the time and resources for my team to do it, right? That anytime I schedule a producer to work on a podcast episode for 2 or 3 hours, that's 2 or 3 hours that person isn't doing something else they could be doing. So it's a constant evaluation. You know, you do have access to metrics like completion rates. So, okay, you're doing this podcast twice a week, and by and large, someone who listens to it finishes 80 to 85% of it. That's not bad, you know. But if you're looking and saying, hey, people are only listening to 50% of the episodes you're doing, then you're either doing too many, you know, too often, or it's not that good. And then you do a little bit of a deeper dive, right? There's some really, really good podcasts that they're just making too many. And there's some really, really good ones that should be making more. Wow. And the numbers can tell you a lot. You get real data there. I think the biggest move for me after 17 years with radio here at ESPN and moving over to digital is sort of those real-time metrics. We publish a podcast in the morning. That afternoon, I can take a look at who's listened, what state they're in when they're listening, what device are they listening on, so on and so forth, as opposed to waiting for the quarterly report to come out.
With all the audio that you do, Pete, you have to be a good listener, and you have to know, obviously, what is entertaining, what is going to catch the listener and want them to continue on and be attentive to the content. You talk about the scale, the what you can measure. How about the way in which you measure, and if we were to throw out a scale here of you being a listener, but in casual conversation, the rate and amount of which you listen and the rate you are talking, what's the breakdown between those two things for you?
Well, the good news is when you're listening to a podcast, nobody's hearing you, right? You can only listen, right? So that's one-sided. I do think the challenge is, and I think this applies to radio as well. Radio or a podcast, if they're talking about something that I'm already interested in, right? They have a great advantage in hooking me. So a team that I care about, a sport that I care about, so on and so forth. But that's not always going to be the case. So then it's a matter of the talent building enough equity with me that, hey, this topic that Bomani Jones is talking about this week isn't something I'm generally into or that I've checked out a lot. But if Bomani's saying this is interesting and there's a reason for me to hang on here, okay, I'm going to do it, right? That I don't necessarily have equity with the topic, but I have equity with the talent. And so that goes a long way. I did not grow up on soccer. I'm not a diehard soccer fan. I will say Syracuse won the national title.
Yes,
that game. And I was actually traveling with my family over the weekend, and we were in a restaurant as the World Cup final was going. We didn't leave. How do you walk out at that point?
Yeah.
So I know when it's important and I know when it's not. I know enough to be dangerous. So a talent needs to hook me with their angle or their passion to get me to hang around if that's not one of my go-to sports on a regular basis. And I think we learned a lot during the pandemic in overseeing a portfolio of 35, 40 original podcasts during that period of time where there was no sports being played. And we're still pumping out content, right? And thank goodness The Last Dance happened and all of that stuff that we put together. But by and large, the podcasts that we're performing, this is the phrase I go to probably way too often on this, it was by the talent that you'd love to have a beer with. Yeah. And you're just hanging out, right? And it's not that they're breaking down the zone defense of an NFL team or the zone defense of a college basketball team. They were just talking to us, right? And being relatable. And never losing sight of that through line of sort of, is this someone I want to hang out with for the next 45 minutes or an hour?
If I was hanging out with you, Pete, and having a beer and watching that World Cup final between Argentina and France, what kind of conversations are we going to have as we're watching that game?
What I was doing was observing the room and just sort of looking around the room, and I was doing like, okay, here's the dude who's really into the game and he's not happy that his wife made him go shopping with him today. Like here's the bartender who's really hoping he doesn't have a big food order come out in a minute because they're doing penalty kicks, and watch how quick these people get their food if they do, right? It's the observational, just sort of the seeing the differences in fandom. And you scan the room and you know who's living and dying on every moment, and you know who just finds it somewhat compelling, and you know who just wants another beer, right? And just watching people consume sports, I always find interesting.
How natural and innate are your talents in observation, in seeing your environment and taking in things and being aware of things that maybe others aren't in the moment?
Oh, I think it's critical. It's not just talent; it's also producers. Someone had told me, I'd seen the phrase about someone, and I'll forget who to attribute to, as being relentlessly curious.
Yeah.
Right. And I'll talk to someone getting into producing, relentlessly curious, and that's about the topic you're covering, the sport you're covering, how the process of making your show works, right? The technology, the control, but you get into podcasting that, what editing software you're using or how the publishing tool works or the metrics of measuring success, which you asked me about. So it's a mix of observational skills, but just also general curiosity. Here's my favorite observational skills story. Back when I was working with Cowherd at ESPN, Colin Cowherd, and he had just started. And one of the executives overseeing radio decided to have the whole department to his home. And it was a large home in a beautiful location, but more specifically, big bookcase, a lot of leadership books, journalism books, so on and so forth, Emmy along the top. And Colin's standing there, and I walk in and I look at the bookcase and I said, well, this confirms I'm never having you guys to my house. and he's like, what do you mean? I says, my bookcase is the rise and fall of the Hartford Whalers, Billy Martin biographies, and a bunch of George Carlin and Garfield books, that I had on there. And Colin goes, can I use that? And I says, what do you mean use that? He goes, Monday morning, I got a show to do. The whole department was at the boss's house. There's no way this, unless something crazy happens in sports this weekend, this is my lead. And I need a day at the boss's house story. And I says, you're going to do Whalers books and Garfield books? He's like, no. It'll be, it's going to be stuff that I have at my house, so on and so forth. He goes, and I was standing here looking at this bookcase, knowing that there's something here. He's like, can I use this? And I'm like, well, one, you have to ask my permission, so on and so forth. And he and I went in this conversation, and together we're like analyzing the bookshelf. And we wound up spending probably a good 20 minutes or more putting together his opening rant for Monday's show while we're at this party, right? And I say that as a testament to Colin that, yes, his observational skills, we collaborated on that, and that's fine. But he got there looking for a bit for Monday's show. That's what drove him. It wasn't like, who am I going to meet? Who am I going to network with? What are the hors d'oeuvres that are being served? So on and so forth. He's looking around knowing I need a bit for Monday's show. And that's what made him great then, and why the general approach to radio that he had then is incredibly sustainable to this day. And it was a joy to work with him, and others like that, and others who do that too.
He finds content, and as you know, and so many that you work with, they find content in places where others don't see content, which I think is fascinating, in that dynamic as well, in ways in which you're able to bring something that the human experience can connect on, and then turn that into a bit and turn that into a rant. Speaking of somebody who has connected with you, your wife, and the way in which you two collaborate, what does that look like?
I think it helps me with that combination, as I said, about different types of sports fandom. So my wife and daughter are Eagles fans, and I'm a Giant fan. So we'll be watching the game, right? And I'm very specifically looking at, hey, is Daniel Jones progressing enough where they should think about bringing him back? Or, all this money we spent on Kenny Golladay, and when are they going to throw him the ball? And I do this sort of tactical, a little bit deeper dive while looking at my phone that I've got 2 Eagles on my fantasy team. So I do have some divergent interests going on in this game. And they just want to be entertained and sort of bond as a group over watching this game.
Beyond sports, where do you and your daughter bond the most?
Wow. It's sort of just leaning into everything, right? It's the school experience. It's the family experience. It's going out to eat. I think my Syracuse rah-rah fandom, she knows that I'm excited about it. That national championship soccer game the other day, she didn't sit there and watch the whole game with me, but when it was going to penalty kicks and I said, come here, you're going to want to see this. Like she really, leaned into it and was really excited and was asking, why do they decide the game this way? Like this is, they're so close. How do they not make it every time? And you're having those conversations. We get our T-shirts tomorrow. I just got the confirmation that we get our national title T-shirts. So she likes the celebration and the supporting me in it, in that way. But it's also part of what we are. I will tell you there was something she wanted to do last night, and it was okay that I didn't watch Giants Commanders for a little while. And really about just balance and priorities and perspective.
The idea of having the family that you have, and then understanding all the responsibilities that you have from a work perspective as well. How do you make time for being, and we're talking about this just, seconds ago, but being present for them when there's so many other people that need you to be present for them as well at ESPN?
So I have a home field advantage. I was born in Bristol, Connecticut, so I'm home. And when I think about the number of people who I work with, who especially this time of year, they're trying to figure out flights, trying to get flights at a reasonable rate, trying to get them at a time where can they get their vacation time, or sort of aligning all those different things, or they live an hour away and they have a long commute every day to build into their day. Like, I'm here, and so I'm at an advantage. Many years I don't even take time off during the holidays, because where am I going? I'm here. I can work a little bit shorter day, or do what I need to do. That give and take of work versus family, so on and so forth, that's not unique to me. That's not unique to our business. I think it's a lot of time of setting expectations in advance, that if you're doing something with your family, but something swirling work wise, it's just like, hey, I may have to step out to take a call or deal with this email or whatever it is. And if you want to put yourself in a situation where you're completely out of pocket, or close to completely out of pocket, who on your team is in position to have your back? And have you given very clearly, hey, beyond the out of office that goes up in your email, is there specific direction that, hey, if you can't get a hold of me, get a hold of this person, and this person can help you accomplish your goals, your needs, answer your question for you. And I've been blessed. You talk about a 25-year run, that whether you're overseeing radio shows or podcasts, I've always had a wonderful professional support system, whether it be my bosses or direct reports or my team, that there's always certain things I can entrust somebody else with in a situation where I may or may not be available. So that is not an area that is incredibly stressful on a day-to-day basis. Now, I'll say this: overseeing radio, which is 24/7, holidays, everything that comes with it, is a little bit different than podcasting. I don't think we're publishing a lot of podcasts on Christmas Day, but we are doing radio. We will be broadcasting games. So it's evolved over the years. And there are some days where you can't, and things just crash into one another. Breaking news, the occasional something tragic that happens that you can't just pass off. And hey, I know it's Sunday. I got to run into the office. Why? Because I live closest to the office, so I can be the first one there, to handle whatever's going on. And it just works, right? So there's no perfect science. I can't tell you. I haven't had days where I've come home and there's sort of an eye roll. Did you really have to stay, or did you really have to do that? Or the reverse is true. You do the best you can.
My guest is Pete Gianesini. I'm Bryan Fenley. What was unique about, and you talk about support systems, your support system during your upbringing in Bristol, growing up? What did that look like?
It's two different things. It's funny. I was raised wonderfully by my family here in Connecticut, many of which who are still here. And I say that I grew up in Syracuse because and by the way, this is true of anybody who goes away to college, I think, is there's this certain degree of like, wow, I can do this and nobody's going to wonder whether it's going to check on me, so on and so forth, right? So you have your opportunity to sort of show your maturity or show your lack of it, and sort of what comes with it, right? When you're away at school, the support system was always huge because, listen, I when I graduated and got my first radio job, which was in Syracuse, I lived there for a year after I graduated. It paid $6 an hour. Right. So there was a little bit of help with sort of covering costs, and, you have trouble with your car and all that stuff that came from your parents. I had the opportunity to move back home to work in Hartford radio, and literally moved back in, right? Moved in and lived with the family. So again, the luxury that I had in the early stages of my career, working overnights, working part-time, the grunt work where you lay the foundation in this business, that having family locally, there's a lot of people who move here from all over the country that have to figure it out in an entry-level job, and it's not easy. That not just the moral compass stuff and being taught right from wrong and everything that came with that, but literally someone who could pick you up and drop you off when your car's in the shop and make sure you get to work and that kind of stuff. I've always had that through my entire ESPN run here, and don't take that for granted.
How would they encourage you in those early stages when you're working overnights and the pay isn't great and you're building up your rapport and your brand and you're chasing something? What would they say to you to just continue to encourage you?
Do you love it? Yes. Are you good at it? I think so. I think when I had the opportunity, I started at ESPN very part-time, working on weekends while I was working in Hartford Monday through Friday. And I was producing a morning show in Hartford, and I loved it. And, so there was a time where I was working both jobs and overnights and everything that came with it. And ESPN, at the time, ESPN Radio wasn't 24/7. It was just Saturday and Sunday nights, but they had designs on going full time. So Len Weiner, who was program director at the time, took me out to lunch and said, "Hey, we'd like for you to consider leaving your radio station and coming here full time. However, this is a production position. Where I was working previously was a little bit of on air, a little bit of behind the scenes, still chasing the bug of being, a radio personality or a play-by-play announcer or whatever came with it. And please understand, this is a production position. This is not a path to an on-air gig. You're essentially making a career change." And I asked for a night to think about it. And I went home, and again, this is 1997. So you take out the box of cassette tapes, which is your resume at the time, and you put in your play-by-play, your hockey and your basketball and everything. And it was time to make an assessment. And I made an assessment of my on-air talent. And I'm like, I'm good, not great. I'm okay. And I have the opportunity to get in on the ground floor of something that's growing at ESPN, worldwide leader in sports. It's your hometown. Like, what are you doing? You know what I mean? And so it was a first thing the next morning, let's go, I'm in. And it's just been an amazing ride since.
Where were you when you were going through that night and thinking of things and listening to your tapes and assessing? And at that time, Pete, did you know the magnitude of that decision in that moment?
There's no way I knew the magnitude because or could see what it would turn into, because I also knew it wasn't a permanent decision, right? I take this gig and it's not working out after a year and a half, I'll go do something else. That it's not irrevocable, right? It's a pivot in the moment. The only thing I'd say to that is I knew that whatever I was deciding, I needed to make sure I could go all in on it, right? And give it everything that I could to make work, and I did. And to ESPN's credit, they reciprocated that by, the company's been wonderful to me and my family, and has allowed for creativity, things that matter, support you when you need it, the ability to lift up others, and evolve into a new technology that didn't, in a platform, podcasting, that didn't even exist when I started. So I'll say this: I don't regret it for a second. When I talk to a lot of people who are at that fork in the road, sort of chasing the on-air gig, but it comes with a big move that doesn't work for their family, or taking the production position, which looks really fun, but it's not going to be their name on the show, so on and so forth. I can only tell them my story and say, listen, especially if you're a kid just starting out, if the idea is you want to go to the big events, you want to be at the Super Bowl, you want to be at the World Series, you want to do, like, you can get to do all that. Very, very few people actually get to call it and do it, right? So both are incredibly rewarding careers. And the decision when you reach that fork in the road is also incredibly personal. I would not be so presumptuous as to foist what has worked out for me positively or negatively onto somebody else and say, this is how it's going to work out for you. You can't promise that.
Wow. That's powerful. And thanks for opening up like that. My last question for you, and just for fun, some revisionist history here. Let's say you were the voice of the Whalers and a goal was scored. How would you call that goal?
With detail and with accuracy. I'm a big stickler with radio play-by-play, and I will fly the flag for my alma mater here. Very specifically working at WAER at Syracuse. My broadcast partner when I did my very first game was Dave Pasch, who's gone on to do wonderful things here at ESPN in football and basketball. He's the radio voice of the Arizona Cardinals. Not too many years before me, Dave Jagler is with the Washington Nationals, and you go back, Ian Eagle, Mike Tirico, Marv Albert, and keep going, is when you're listening on the radio, and chances are when you're in position where you opt to use radio, you're somewhere where television's not an option, right? You're probably in your car or you're working out in the yard or whatever it is. And the most important thing you want to know is what's going on in the game, right? That who's got the ball, where in the quarter of the play, which way are they going? If you just yell touchdown, okay, great, it's a touchdown. Who caught it? Was it even thrown? That the very specific skill set of describing play-by-play on the radio. And I've read about individual teams that have chosen that, hey, we're just going to take their television call and throw it on radio to save a few bucks, so on and so forth. But like a little piece of you dies every time when you see that happen, because the listening experience 9 times out of 10 at that type of presentation, it just doesn't cut it. So I think I would honor the job and the responsibility of the position, which is to let people know what's happening. I don't think I'd be worried about the signature call or the catchphrase or the whole thing. Now, that said, there's probably some T-shirts to be made and stuff like that if you came up with one. So maybe the capitalist in me would eventually fall and go that route. But I think it would be to serve the listener, and in this case, serve the diehard Whalers fan.
Well, I think this conversation served so many in getting to know what's going on in the game of Pete Gianesini. And I think we were able to accomplish that. A beautiful conversation, talked about your work and your family and the enjoyable look outside your window where you get to see the campus of ESPN. And I'm sure you've had a lot of great walks through campus. And I even saw that didn't you do a 5K around campus or something like that? Was that?
It is. So yeah, the pandemic purchase was a treadmill in the middle of the living room, and got on and started running and kind of kept running. And in the just prior to that one, I ran a 5K locally, and you're signing up for the thing, and it says, "Have you run a 5K before?" And it's like, yes. And they asked about most recent one, and I'm like, 1989. So all to say, I just got back in that game, and I'm certain, if something's 13.1 miles away, that's why I make car payments. I don't think the long distance run is in the cards for me. But 5K, 10K, I'm really enjoying that. And yeah, it's a really neat thing they do here right on the campus. It's for employees, and they've done it for their families where it's a couple laps around here, and that kind of stuff's always fun. And you missed so many experiences like that during the couple of years of being home. You talk about this office, I'll probably close with this. The day that we all went home in March of 2020, it was exactly 500 days later that I returned to this office and looked out that window. And the day I left, I thought it was going to be a couple weeks, maybe a month, and it was 500 days. And it's another version of the count your blessings, don't take things for granted speech that you've probably heard in a number of these conversations. But to be able to look out the window and run a couple laps around your place of employment, definitely was able to appreciate it more this time around.
Well, it goes without saying, with your 25 plus years at ESPN, there is a version of you that is good at long distance running.
Great
Pete
point.
Gianesini, I'm Bryan Fenley. Thanks so much for doing this. Had so much fun with you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This was great.